Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of IndyCar on Tuesday the 7th of May. In this particular edition I want to move away from talking about politics eventually, but I've got one more subject to talk to you about today which has been in the news, and I have been asked to try and explain it, or at least deal with the subject. And this subject is to do with Michael Gove, the Tory MP, who is actually Scottish, although you'd never guess to listen to him, and about the various pronouncements he's made recently about withholding tens of millions of pounds of UK funding to the Scottish economy if, and this is a very unlikely scenario, if he became the Prime Minister. Now let's first have a look at whether any of this is even actually possible, and whether or not it isn't already actually going on. If you think about it for just a moment, just consider the facts just now. Anything that is not specifically reserved to Westminster is automatically devolved as a power. Now that means things like health, education, law. Okay, so things like that already devolved, plus all of the other things that the Scottish Parliament deals with on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so under the rules of the Scotland Act and under the Sewell Convention and all these other bits and pieces of British legislation, Scotland has limited tax raising powers, and it relies entirely for its ongoing funding from Westminster giving back about half of all the tax revenues that we give them back to us as the so-called Barnett formula. This is the amount of funding that London thinks Scotland needs to run. So they're already restricting the amount of money that we get. They're already taking 40% of our tax take and holding it in England to be spent somewhere else in the UK. So first things first, withholding tens of millions of pounds already happening. All right, they're already withholding somewhere in the region of about £28 billion worth of Scottish revenues without Michael Gove being the Prime Minister at all. So that's the first thing. That kind of puts the whole thing into perspective. So what is Gove actually on about? Well, if you think about this again, about what's happening already, you'll have heard about these city deals that the UK has been giving to individual city councils all across the United Kingdom, including Scotland. And what they do with these things is that the Tories look at city councils that are largely Conservative controlled, and they give them preferential treatment. They'll give them extra funding to improve their local amenities or to improve their infrastructure, like bypass roads or libraries or swimming pools or sports complexes or something else that's useful to that particular city. So that is money over and above anything that the Scottish Government spends, and this is a discretionary spend made by the Tory government. So they're already doing this, they're already withholding money and giving it to their friends in Scotland as it is. Gove's comments specifically mentioned areas such as farming and perhaps fisheries and perhaps even bits and pieces of the oil industry. But what he's talking about is actually withholding money, as he claims, tens of millions of pounds, and giving it to other Tories. So in other words, giving it to farmers, giving it to fishermen, and targeting this extra so-called withheld money at friends of the Conservative Party and friends of the British government. So what you're looking at here is basically union bribes to the very tiny number of Tories who still remain in Scotland. So Gove, although he says he's going to do this if he becomes Prime Minister, and that's a ginormous if. I mean, can you imagine Gove as the Prime Minister? But anyway, even if he was, this is already happening. This is an empty threat. The Tories have been doing this for decades. They've been funding their choice of Tory councils for years, and they're just going to continue to do that. So anything that Gove comes up with in terms of threatening to withhold money from the Scottish people is largely an empty threat. It's already happening, and it's been happening ever since the Barnett formula was invented. You've already lost £28 billion. A few tens of millions here and there is not even going to be missed. We're already missing half our tax revenues. They've already been stolen from us by Gove and his friends. So, stealing another 10 million, what difference is it going to make against 28 billion pounds? Okay, so second piece of news today, and moving away entirely from politics, is how do we continue to improve the railway network in Scotland? And you've heard me complaining about the weird situation, the quasi public-private sector partnership that runs the Scottish railway system. This ScotRail, which gives out franchises to companies from Europe, it seems, to run the Scottish Railway on behalf of the Scottish people for a fixed price. Is it actually value for money? Because most of us seem to think that it's vastly overpriced for what we get. Okay, we all have opinions on that, but what I want to talk about with the railways today is how do we get faster non-carbon trains running from places like Glasgow Central all the way up through the Highlands to, say, Inverness or Aberdeen or Peterhead or further flung places in the Highlands that are difficult to reach. Most of the trains that run up the line to Inverness are diesel trains because the electrification of that line is not complete. There is electrification over part of the route, but most of it runs out, and eventually you're forced into diesel trains which take you all the way further north. Now obviously diesel trains are going to spew out an awful lot of carbon dioxide and other nasty stuff, including nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides. All of these are horrible and not something that we want to have spewing out of a railway network. So if we're going to decarbonise, we need to find a way of electrifying the trains that doesn't cost a fortune in terms of infrastructure. Now you'll know from watching the way that railway networks have been electrified in the past that it usually consists of large steel pylons, lots of cables running over the top of the tracks, picking up the electricity from the cable with a pantograph as the train passes underneath. It's a very, very old-fashioned 19th century method of delivering electric power to a moving vehicle. So is there a better way of doing it? Well, the answer is yes. In Germany, they have already developed the first hydrogen-powered electric train. Now, when I say hydrogen-powered, what I mean is they use their wind energy instead of generating power when it's not needed to split water into its two component parts, hydrogen and oxygen. They then compress and bottle hydrogen up as a fuel. Now that means you're storing energy, which you can then put into a vehicle, like you would put petrol into the tank of a car. But instead of the hydrogen being burned in the engine and combusting and losing an awful lot of its energy as heat, they pass it through a thing called a fuel cell. And what that does is it recombines the hydrogen and the oxygen molecules back together again, and in the process of doing that generates a lot of electricity. So it's like a battery that's powered by hydrogen. And in Germany what they've done is they've created a train which runs on this system. It uses bottled hydrogen as the fuel, so the train carries its fuel with it, doesn't require overhead power lines, but it's not combustion powered. The hydrogen isn't burned, but it's recombined with the oxygen, produces a lot of electricity which drives the train's electric motors, and the only exhaust coming from the train is a little bit of water vapour. Now, bear with me for a moment. Imagine that those trains in Germany, which have been developed there, are already commissioned and running. If we were to take all of the diesel trains that run up to the Highlands and basically scrap them, melt them down, okay? We get Germany to supply us with a new rolling stock of these hydrogen gas powered locomotives, electric locomotives. How are we going to pay for it? You might ask. Well, the simple way of paying for it is for Scotland, which has even more renewable energy than Germany, far more in fact, were to use our existing hydrogen producing capacity in the Northern Islands and also spread that down onto the northern coast of Scotland, generate and bottle as much hydrogen as we can possibly make from all this massive amount of surplus tidal and wind energy we have, and in exchange for these trains we swap it. We swap all that energy with Germany for the trains. We do a trade. So the idea is that Germany gets, in exchange for its trains, it gets free fuel for its own trains. So Germany gets fuel for its electric trains, and Scotland gets electric trains for its fuel. This way both countries benefit from each other's strengths. The Germans have already developed the train, Scotland has developed the hydrogen production technology and can produce more of it. And in this way, we can balance our economy with Germany so that both countries benefit without any cash transactions happening. And by doing this, we take the profit motive out of the railway system, and it means that both railways can decarbonise, and eventually all of the trains in Scotland can run using this system. And all of the power lines that have been scarring the landscape for so long can be dismantled and taken away because they're no longer needed. If the train carries its own energy with it, it doesn't need to pick it up from cabling. That cabling, all those great big pylons and the miles and miles of copper wire and steel wire that's needed to electrify a railway track, costs billions of pounds. It's far easier and much more efficient for us to do a trade swap with Germany in this way. So this is the way I see things going in the future, but only, and I'm saying only, if Scotland were to actually do a deal with Germany, and that's going to be extremely difficult if the United Kingdom succeeds in dragging us all out of the European Union. So it's very important that Scotland becomes independent as soon as possible so that we avoid that fate, and that we use our existing very good relationship with both Europe, but specifically with Germany, to do a deal like this. Now, on the back of this, I mentioned in the blurb on this programme, something else is happening in Europe that nobody talks about. The European Union, much derided by the Brexiteers, is giving France and Germany each approximately 5.5 billion euros to develop massive electric car battery factories. Each country will get a plant that will produce thousands of batteries for electric cars all over Europe. Each plant will produce somewhere in the region of, 1,500 jobs in each factory. So a lot of it will be robotically produced to bring the cost down. The reason for this activity at the moment is that China is far ahead of everybody else in developing electric batteries for cars. The Americans with Tesla are planning to build a massive battery factory, if I remember correctly, in New Mexico or somewhere like that. Elon Musk is behind that. In Europe, there's nothing. We are lagging behind. So the Germans and the French are getting this huge amount of investment to manufacture batteries for the electric car market. Now, although Scotland might be small, and we might have missed the boat in terms of the battery technology, we are already ahead of the game with the hydrogen production facilities that we have here. And if we further develop those, we, if we stay in the European Union, could get the similar type of funding, but not to make batteries for cars, but to create hydrogen plant for larger vehicles like buses, like trucks, larger cars, long distance vehicles, even ships. We're already working on a ferry that's entirely powered by hydrogen, which is entirely manufactured on the island where the ferry goes by wind and tidal energy. So we're already working in this field. So the future for us, if you think the way I do, as a kind of green nationalist, if you like, is that we can do deals with the European Union and we can fit into this energy mix that is coming around now. Oil will die very soon, and I'm thinking more and more that although we always thought of North Sea oil as being a gigantic sort of feather in our cap, you know, a massive gold mine of wealth for Scotland, most of that wealth has already been squandered by the United Kingdom in decades of profligate, wasteful spending, and also in supporting huge amounts of unemployment during the 1980s. Now, if the North Sea is playing out, if it's coming to the end of its glory days, then maybe the best thing we can do is actually sell that to England. And maybe also retrospectively ask England to repay the interest on the money it earned from selling Scotland's resources. They probably will never do that. But the point is that we can leave the whole oil industry behind. Scotland is already making enough money to be independent without any oil at all, and we're already running at a profit. Scotland is making larger and larger trade surpluses every year. But we can't do that if we are chucked out of Europe. So we have to become independent. We must stay in close contact with Europe, and we must do deals with the European Union on this vital new energy technology, because we're at the forefront of it. And if we miss this boat, it won't come along again. We will be left sitting in the sidelines, eating the dust of other countries that have sped past us. We have the technology and we've developed it. This country, and I mean Britain, I mean the UK, is terrible for not investing in its own inventions. We allow them to be sold to America or other countries and we never see the full benefit of any of it. So it's vital for Scotland as a country to trade with countries like Germany in energy and resources, not in cash and not for profit, but so that the countries have what they need and that people have the energy they need for their transport and that it's affordable. Because the way to survive the next century is not to be making profits and ripping people off. It's not to be hoarding money and becoming billionaires. It's in the sharing and the exchange of the existing resources that we have, and also in the recycling of those resources at the end of the working life cycle of whatever it is we're making. And that would include these trains, it would include the fuel cells, include the motors and the engines, and everything else that goes along with these new technologies must have a life cycle, must have a recycle date at the end of its life, so that everything that we do is accounted for. When we live in the future, we have to live in a future where resources are finite. We can no longer take it for granted that the world will keep on giving up its wealth to us and not get damaged. We know that doesn't work. We know the earth is overheating, we know that we're causing it, we know the sea is polluted because we are causing that. We need to stop making plastics, we need to reinvest the money that we would have spent making plastics into things like hydrogen production and the creation of new transport infrastructure which is clean, efficient and recyclable. Everything can be reused again and again and again. If we learn how to do this now, we can dictate the terms to everybody else on the planet. We can show them the way. Anyway, these are big issues and take a lot of thought, but somebody needs to think about them now. It's very tempting when we are involved in a campaign to free ourselves from basically from the usury of another country which is using our resources up and giving us nothing for them. And people like Michael Gove, who think that they can punitively punish Scottish people by somehow withholding money from the majority of Scots and giving it to a minority of Tory voters in a small enclave in the northeast of Scotland. We have to think bigger than that. We have to think about the whole future, not just the next couple of years. We have to aim for something much bigger than that. If Scotland is going to be a successful country, we need to abandon the old ways of doing things. We need to leave oil behind, coal behind, leave it in the ground. Maybe just finish whatever new wells that we've got for gas and oil, just exploit those for what's in them and then leave it, because let's face it, oil is the technology of the past, just in the same way that steam engines are the technology of the past. Coal is the fuel of the past, and before that wood was the fuel of the past. And by burning wood and burning coal and burning oil, all we have done is denude the planet of trees, fill its atmosphere with carbon dioxide and other toxins, and warm the whole planet up to the point where the sea level is rising, the ice caps are melting, and millions of people are likely to drown because of it. It is time to end the oil era. And I want Scotland to be the first country to do it. Not only the first country to do it, but I want us to set the rules of this new paradigm to show people how a country can live in a balanced, ecologically benign way and be completely successful, where everybody can have what they need, where lifestyles don't necessarily need to drop very far, that we use less, that we consume less, that we make things that last longer, things that can be recycled easily at the end of their working lives, and that we value nature, that we value our surroundings, we value the rest of the planet far more than we do now. At the moment we worship money and things. But when money and things are all that's left, and there's no clean air to breathe and no clean water and no food left, what good are those things that you've accumulated throughout your life? If your life's going to be very short and painful, and your children's future is going to be even shorter and worse. So we need to think about this. And I'm really just appealing to you all today not to just see the narrow picture of independence as just that. It is essential that we liberate ourselves from this indenture that we have been trapped in for 300 years. But it's also important that we start to show what we can do with this country. And that means not doing things the way they've been done before. That means no more trying to make money out of money. I mean, I heard recently that my own pension plan, the Strathclyde pension scheme, has been investing money in Raytheon, in BAE Systems, in Lockheed Martin, all these massive weapons manufacturers. And now I feel guilty that I'm going to be getting a pension that has made its money off the backs of the misery and destruction of other people's countries. This is what I mean. These are the kinds of things we have to think bigger about. We're connected to everything through what we consume. And as you know, money is at the root of most evil. Well, why don't we start dealing with other countries without money? Why don't we start dealing in commodities, in energy? Energy is going to be our biggest and most important resource in the future. We've got so much of it, and all we have to do is convert it. Anyway, I'm becoming a bit of a preacher on the subject of green issues, but it's important to me, and it will be important to your kids and your grandchildren and all their descendants in the future. Let's return Scotland back to its rightful place. It was once at the centre of the Enlightenment, and it is a centre of excellence for education, for thought, for new ideas and innovation. And we have a tradition of engineering excellence, a tradition of inventiveness, a tradition of being able to bootstrap and make do with a lot less than a lot of other countries have got. So, that's what we should be. We should start practicing living as we're going to live in the future. Let's start looking at how we trade with other countries without cash, how we do deals without profits, but with benefits for both countries, for both parties. A good deal is where you do a trade with someone that benefits both of them. When a trade benefits only one person, then it disadvantages somebody else. That doesn't make the world a better place. That just makes one person richer than another, but it doesn't help both parties to thrive. It just means one party is going to become stupidly wealthy with far more money than it can ever spend, while somebody else in another country starves to death because they've got nothing. This is the world of the past, and the past is exactly where that kind of situation should go. It's time for Scotland to think bigger, and it's time for the Green Party, the SNP, myself, anybody else who cares about the future to start pressing their politicians to start proposing exactly this kind of thing. I know the SNP is very open to this, and I know they have been taking actions to bolster the investment in our natural energy resources, but we also need to create employment here, and that means we need to be doing something which is different from what everyone else is doing. And what we do differently here is we make hydrogen. If we become a hydrogen producing country which produces hydrogen from wind and tide energy which surrounds us, then we will have a far more valuable commodity than any oil could ever be. Not to mention the fact that we've got the finest drinking water anywhere on the planet. Anyway, I shall leave it there today, but again, as I say, not really a political programme today, more looking at a vision of the future. And I hope this little insight gives you some idea of what's possible in the future for Scotland if we are free from being dragged back into the 19th century by Tory England, which is going to retreat from Europe, shut the doors and isolate itself forever. We mustn't allow that to happen. We have to live in an interconnected world, and we have to trade with other people, and we have to do our trade better than we've been doing up until now, and we have to do it for the benefit not just of ourselves but other people and the environment and the rest of the planet in general. There is a way of doing it, and we will find that way of living, and we can do that only if we're not forced to go along with the old-fashioned, outdated, backward-stepping UK. And that's basically the message. We need to move out of the past. We can only do that if we shake off the shackles of the United Kingdom. See you later. Bye bye.